Probably the biggest football fan in the Senate happens to be our next guest, Senator Marco Rubio, Vice Chair of the Senate Intel Committee, but he'd rather be Commissioner of Football. Senator, I know you're pumped up for the NFL season, probably more optimistic for the Dolphins than any time else, right?
Yeah, I mean, the AFC's loaded this year, so it's probably, you're going to have really good teams in the AFC aren't going to make it into the playoffs this year, but I'm hoping the Dolphins aren't one of them. But I'm excited about the game tonight. I think Detroit is dramatically improved, and they're going to get a chance to showcase that on national TV. I actually have a friend of mine who's on the practice squad, a young man I root for very much, and I hope he gets elevated for tonight's game. And of course, anytime an AFC team has a chance to lose, I hope they lose. So,
do you really have time to watch football with your busy schedule?
Yeah, because they're usually at night and on Sunday afternoons. If they started scheduling them on Thursday at noon, I'd probably have trouble keeping track with it. But then that's where you prioritize China or the Miami Dolphins.
Great point. Absolutely.
You know.
All right, speaking of national television, big story over the last 18 hours, Senator, is the fact that we got a preliminary report on the status of that gun diversion case with Hunter Biden in Delaware. And it turns out David Weiss is now special attorney on this, says that he expects to seat a grand jury and bring charges against Hunter regarding the guns and maybe other stuff by the end of this month. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I think he should be treated like any American citizen would be treated in a case like this. That's the gun case. And I think to the extent that there's any evidence or has been in the past of special treatment, that's where the political angle lies.
Yep.
I think the more serious problem here is, how did Hunter Biden make all this money? Look, we can't abandon common sense. If his last name wasn't Biden, there is no way in the world that he would have made millions of dollars that he's made and funneled through these shell companies that they created for the family. So clearly he was trading on something, which was relationships with his father when his father was vice president. I think that is relevant, particularly to the extent that Biden was involved. But something a lot of people don't talk about is, if in fact there was these kind of double dealing going on, the Chinese know that, and they have information on that, and that could be used as leverage against the President of the United States. Now, I don't have evidence of that, but I do think that's the questions that we need to be trying to answer. If there's evidence, it needs to be brought forward, and if there isn't, then there isn't. But it's a serious question, and there's real anecdotal and preliminary indications that it's something worth looking into seriously.
Yeah, and because of that speculation and those concerns, there's now growing pressure on House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to launch an impeachment inquiry, and he suggested that he might hold a vote on that. Do you think the House should proceed with an impeachment inquiry?
Well, let me tell you, I'm not an impeachment fan, all right, because I do a lot of foreign policy work. Like Peru, impeachment's become like the national sport, right? They impeach every president. I don't want that. That's disruptive. The Chinese look at that, and it encourages them to be more aggressive because America looks dysfunctional. Now, that said, my understanding is that the reason why they would do an impeachment inquiry is not so much to lead to impeachment per se, although that's where it could lead potentially, but because it's a way to gain evidence that they can't get right now. That their subpoenas are being ignored, the courts are not enforcing them. An impeachment inquiry can potentially allow them to gather evidence that either proves that there's nothing here, as the Democrats claim, or there is, and we need to address it. So, but I'm not rooting for impeachment. I want Joe Biden to lose an election. And or whoever the Democratic nominee is, because I don't think it's good for the country. We've seen the trauma they've inflicted on this country because of their Trump obsession, and continue to inflict on the country because of that obsession.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about, Joe Biden making fun of Infrastructure Week, that they never got it going during the Trump administration. You know why? Because of the Russia stuff that they brought up at the time. Every time they roll out infrastructure, some other fake Russian lead would pop up and distract everybody. But,
that and a global pandemic in which local authorities across the country were prohibiting people from working.
Right. And by the way, just so you know, we're not trying to, I don't think the main focus on people interested in the Hunter Biden thing is to put the screws to a former drug addict who loved hookers and was buying a gun and lied on the forum. It's how it relates to Joe is the bigger story.
That's
and 60% in the CNN poll, 60% of the American public thinks Joe had something to do with Hunter Biden's business dealings. And I think that's important. It shows the message is getting through and the distraction isn't. So let's talk again, if we could talk about Senator Mitch McConnell. Yesterday he gave a press conference trying to underline that he's healthy. He froze twice and very scarily says it's the remnants of a concussion. Senator Rubio, do you think he's okay to lead your caucus?
Well, number one, the doctors have looked at that, so I have to go off what doctors have said. Here's what I can tell you, and whether you like Mitch McConnell or not, I know people may be watching, some people, conservatives, others are not big fans or whatever it may be. Here's what I can tell you. I've never, in my interactions with him since he had that fall, has he ever appeared to me to be a different person than he was before that fall. Now, obviously, those are scary incidents because they're in front of the whole country, but he knows everything that's going on. He has a plan A, B, and C for every direction. He speaks out and he's operating exactly as he did before. I happen to have, believe it or not, an extensive conversation with him yesterday for a few minutes about football, college football conference realignment. And he was entirely familiar with what was happening. He knew all the rationale behind it. He understood the money that was driving it. So I have not seen anything different. Now, those are scary things, and obviously I'm glad he's been transparent and talked about what it's the remnants of. Now, there are people out there in the world that don't like him and don't want him to be majority leader for other reasons, but it is nothing in comparison to what we see on a daily basis from the President of the United States. Mitch McConnell, for example, does not control the nuclear arsenal of the United States. The guy who often forgets where he is, does. And there's a big difference.
Indeed. And Senator, I have a feeling, in addition to college football, you probably talked to Mr. McConnell, Senator McConnell, about your labor report. You're just releasing it. It's called The State of the Working and Non-Working Man. Give us the highlights of it.
I think the highlight of it is that if you look at the unemployment numbers among working-age men, we have as many unemployed working-age men today as we did during the Great Depression. And the reason why is because it's not just the unemployment number, which is the percentage of people looking for work that are not working. It's the percentage of people able to work that are not working. And there are a couple reasons for it. One is sociological. There's something happening in our culture and in our society about that. But the other is the types of jobs being created. If you think about what were the jobs that working-age men without college degrees did, raised families on, built communities on. They worked in factories, they worked in industry, they worked in construction, they worked in these trades. They worked these jobs where you take a shower after work, not before work. Those are the jobs that have disappeared primarily since we started treating China 30 years ago like a normal country, and we allowed them to take all these jobs. So today we're a country that no longer makes things like we used to, build things like we used to, and the result is the kinds of jobs that working-age men once filled, there are less of them, and there are less of them that pay enough. And I think that's a big factor. So when we talk about the national interest, we have to be a country that makes things and builds things again because, number one, it leaves us dependent on other countries if we can't, and number two, because it's a source of good-paying jobs, particularly for working-age men.
Yeah, Senator, there's also a new CNN poll out this morning. The question is, do you think President Biden's policies have improved or worsened economic conditions in the United States? That's the key question, and I have a feeling the Biden administration is going to wake up this morning not liking the answer. 58% of people say that his policies have worsened the economic condition in this country. 24% say that things have improved. 18% say no effect whatsoever. What's your reaction to that poll?
Well, I think the reaction to that poll reveals the difference between what the experts involved in Washington and New York and on television are always talking about with these economic numbers and the reality of people who have seen their cost of living on basic things go up 200% in the last 2 years. I mean, whose salary has increased, doubled in the last 2 years? Who's seen that sort of increase when you talk about all the basics from food, housing, things of that nature? And so I think a lot of our economic numbers today are out of touch. They reflect macro, big picture indicators. But when you drill down to what it means to a real person in the real world, taking their kids to school this morning and then going to work and having to pay bills tonight, it's a very different world. And that's what that poll reflects, is that these elites and people in positions of power talk one way, but the real life experience of real people looks very different.
And Senator, here's what's maddening. We have a situation where gas prices are going up and production with the Saudis and Russians are going down. And the president chose yesterday to cut off drilling in Alaska, which Congress approved, while selling off the fence, which we paid for, pennies on the dollar, which Congress is about to mandate be put up. How is this allowed to happen?
Well, the same executive authority that authorized it has deauthorized it. Obviously, Congress can issue these disapproval votes. But let's be frank, the majority party in the Senate right now, unfortunately, is a party that agrees with this agenda. And it's an agenda that basically says we can make the world have less hurricanes, less wildfires, and not be this hot if all we did is stop drilling for oil. That's a lie. That's not true. Of
course it is.
But what is true, and the immediate impact of it, is that the prices that people are paying every day will go up. Now, an increase in the gas for someone who makes a lot of money and these coastal elites, they don't notice it or they don't care. But for working people who every day have to go out and drop their kids off at school and then drive really far to work and then come back again in the afternoon, it's taking a huge bite, and it's making them more insecure, and it's reflected in that poll that you just
saw. It shows they don't care.
And it's incredible that the Biden administration would make that move given the economic numbers, but I guess that's his prerogative. Senator, I got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.